So, 3 years ago, I spent Christmas in Puerto Vallarta, which is a place on the west coast of Mexico. Beautiful place. It was goodbye Shanghai, goodbye winter, hello palm trees, hello tequila. It was my first time ever in Mexico, my first time ever in Latin America. But more importantly, it was the first time that I'd ever been away from my family at Christmas. Even though I'd lived in Asia for 10 years at that point, I'd always made a point of going back either home or meeting somewhere else to meet my family. Either my family or that of my partner. So maybe it was guilt that I was feeling when I was on that boat in the bay, looking at the beautiful dolphins jumping in unison. Maybe it wasn't guilt. Whatever it was, it would be a heightened sensitivity when later that same day, I went into a tourist shop in Mexico. And what did I see but an array of skulls and skeletons? Like this is Christmas, right? Not Halloween. But it was just one. It was a whole section of the shop. It was all kinds of different varieties. There was big ones and small ones and dark ones and colourful ones and scary ones and cute ones. So anyone who's been to Mexico or has seen the Disney Pixar movie Coco will know that this is to do with Dia de Muertos, the Day of the Dead. It's an Aztec tradition that still is practiced today in Mexico. And actually, it's not just Christmas. You can go to any tourist shop in any place in Mexico, any time of the year, and you will see all of this skull and skeleton paraphernalia. But I didn't know anything about that at the time, and I was confused. I'm like, what is this place? Is this country obsessed with death? Like, why are all these things around? And of course, I quickly learned that it wasn't a bad thing. It was actually a joyous occasion. It was to celebrate your ancestors, and it wasn't sad at all. So now when I think back to that holiday in Mexico, yes, we had a great road trip, very adventurous. Yes, there were those beautiful dolphins with the sleek bodies, the uncanny intelligence. No, this is not about dolphins. No, I keep going back to the skulls and skeletons. What I mean is death. Death. Because here we are in Shanghai. We've all come together for this joyous occasion. But actually, what brings us together more than death? What is more universal than death?
Life.
Actually, a good point. End of story. You can get me on that one. What my point was going to be, I knew there'd be a heckle. I knew there would be.
Sorry.
The reason why I bring it up here in China was because I figured another thing that joins us, the Chinese society and Western societies in general, is that we all have the taboo around death. None of us like to talk about it. It's the ultimate taboo, literally ultimate. Now, I'm no stranger to this taboo. My mother died when I was 11 years old, after a prolonged illness. And maybe that's what brought me to this subject. Because maybe it wasn't Mexico. Maybe it's the fact that my mother died when she was 42 years old, and that's the same age that I'll be on my next birthday. Now, these days I've heard there's lots of good therapy available to children when they experience death at a young age. But back in those days, it just wasn't a thing. Back in those days, the family just closed ranks and dealt with it. And that certainly happened with me. And the taboo of death in my family was extremely strong. The three of us, my father, my brother, and I, we barely even mentioned my mother's name for maybe 10 years after she died. We were all spiraling out into our own personal coping mechanisms and not telling the other one anything about it. For me personally, it was a bewildering experience. Until then, I'd always been a mummy's boy. And now a mummy's boy with no mummy. When I saw happy families, either in real life or on the TV, I was depressed. When a stranger would come up to me and just casually mention my mother or their mother or mothers in general, I bristled. But I hid it well, because that was my coping mechanism. I would bury all those feelings, all those emotions of loss, of fear, of anger, of pain, and then live my life with a veneer of good nature and humour. I certainly am not the first person to do that. The other thing I got used to doing was hiding the idea, or at least exploring the idea of why life didn't make sense anymore. So what I would do is, this is where it gets embarrassing. I go to the library in my school, and in the library there used to be a small number, back in those days we still had them, there's a small number of personal computers. And I would go to the library, and I would tippy-tap on the computer. And they were lovely little games, and with these games I learned all the countries of the world. Tippy-tap, tippy-tap, tippy-tap. And then I would learn all the capital cities of the world. Tippy-tap, tippy-tap. All the time burying the emotions, burying the emotions. After I finished with the capitals, I moved on to the US states. I learned all the US states, tippy-tap, tippy-tap. And all the capitals of the US states, burying, tippy-tap, burying, tippy. You get it, right? And then all the flags of the world, and so on and so on. The other thing I would do to help was actually focus on the television. I was very fixated with the television. Now, this is partly to do with the fact that I learned most of my social skills from the TV. Heaven knows, from what you've heard already, I didn't have many friends to learn from, did I? So there I was. Every time I would open up the TV guide and I would look, it was like a scientific experiment. I would see, okay, what channel is it on, what time, and I would all coordinate, just a lot of effort. I would even cut it out, and I would stick it into a little paper, and I don't even know what I was thinking. It didn't even stop there. Then we got a VHS recorder, and then I would start to video these things, and then I started to collect all these videotapes, and then I would categorize the videotapes too. I must have been a big worry to my family back then. Now, it's not part of this story, but 20 years later, it should come as no surprise to you that I did help to start the first database of my own headhunting company. So there was a somewhat happy ending here. But going back to that time, I had learned how to bury my emotions so successfully that when I was confronted by an element of my past, it came as a huge shock. It was like my mother had suddenly died all over again. The one thing I remember, I guess it was the main time this happened, I was 19 years old, so some 8 years after my mother had died. And I'd just come back from university. I went back to my hometown in London. I'd been putting off going to the optician. I needed a sight test. I knew I did, but I'd been putting it off, and I've got time now, I might as well go down to the optician down the street. And so I did. And I was in the optician's, in the waiting room, when it dawned on me, okay, wait a minute. I haven't been in this room since my mother died. And at the same time that realization came, so my heart started to palpitate. And I could feel every muscle in my body start to tense up. And basically, by the time that my name was called to go into the examination room, there were so many tears in my eyes that I couldn't even start the eye test. Well, at that point I realized, okay, Oscar, you've got a problem. And I just started hearing about therapy at that point in my life, and I thought, yes, maybe this is something for me. But I had a second problem, which was I was about to go to my third year of university, which was abroad in Germany. So I figured, okay, I've procrastinated all of this time, I might as well procrastinate one more year, and that's what I did. So I went to Germany and burying, this time in German. But then I came back and I did it. I went to therapy. It was the first thing I did, basically, when I came back for my final year of university in the UK. And I didn't really know what to expect. I walked into this door and into the door. That was the first mistake. I opened the door. I walked into the room. I met the nice lady and we sat down and I was like, okay, well, what do we do? And she said, well, you just talk. Well, why are you here? And then, yeah, I can feel it now. I started to talk and that same feeling arose, the palpitations. And I could feel the tenseness. I think my muscles are still tense to this day, just thinking about it. And then, as you probably can imagine, my face just basically erupted. I mean, all of those pent-in feelings, that almost 10 years of near-perfect denial just came bursting out of my face. I mean, I don't know how many sentences I even got to say during that session. I think I must have just said 2 sentences the whole time. I was ugly crying to that extent. It was even more a waste of money than that bloody optician's appointment. But this time I did not procrastinate. This time I went back the following week, and the week after that, and the week after that. And by the time I was ready to go to my graduation ceremony, which was at the end of that year, I felt that I had really achieved something. I felt that the memory of my mother that I had buried her so long, and with all the other emotions, was finally not buried. And when I was at the graduation ceremony, I really felt that she was there with my family in the audience, proudly looking on at me. Now these days, I think I'm much more well-adjusted, or at least about this bit. Thank you. Well, I mean, it came from that moment, which was now 20 years ago. And my family and I these days can talk much more freely about my mother. In fact, you might say I've over-adjusted. You're thinking, yeah, no shit, you're up here talking about it on stage. Actually, but it's not this that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the final thing I want to say about this, which is my friend Jennifer. Now, Jennifer is an amazing person. I got to know Jennifer when I lived in Hong Kong. I got to know Jennifer when her husband was dying of a similar disease to my mother. And what did we even do in that situation? I figured the best that I could do was just to be there when she wanted to talk. And as it turned out, to be there when she wanted to drink, which was a hell of a lot back then. Understandably. Sorry, Jen. But then that carried on after her husband died. And we would go out, it wasn't just her and I, it was a group of us. But there in that group, just a couple of people sometimes, I could see it, I could smell it, that taboo of death. It was in the same old aphorisms that people say, the same awkward look in their eyes, not quite knowing what to say and when to politely depart. They meant no harm, of course, no one does. But that's when I realized, yeah, there is something I can do here. I can make damn sure this woman does not make a similar mistake that I did. And so, pretty much straight away, I started thinking about, well, what can I say that others aren't? And I came up with the phrase, dead husband. Because I figured I had the same feeling about that word, that taboo, that I had about my own dead mother. So the first time I said it, it must have been 5 or 6 weeks after Mike died. She burst out laughing. The second and third times, she cried, and so did I. But after that, it became a mixture of the two. And she knew my story, I knew her story. But other people didn't know. And when they would overhear what we were talking about and the way we were talking about it, the angry looks we got, because we'd crossed the line of some kind of disrespect. But both she and I knew, especially me with my history, there can be no greater respect than allowing yourself to say the phrase, dead husband or dead mother. Now, I was going to end this story on the bombshell, dead mother. Mic drop. But even I figured that would be a little bit rougher, especially around Christmas. So here's what I want to say. Just think when I was there 3 years ago in Puerto Vallarta, I knew that I wasn't going to be around my family that Christmas. Some of you are going to be the same this year. Some of you are not going to be around your loved ones at all this Christmas. Some of you are not going to be around your loved ones ever again. So let's think about what they do in Mexico. This year, please make sure you spend a lot more time thinking about your family and talking about your loved ones. And if they could reply, I think they would use the words from that Disney Pixar movie, Coco. And that's what I've got in my pocket. That's how I want to end this story. Remember me, for I will soon be gone. Remember me, and let the love we have live on. And know that I am with you the only way that I can be. So until you're in my arms again, remember me. Thank you.